Well, Gary, that was a good word. Just so happens I think I'll preach on that. Before there were crock pots and microwaves, there was a piece of cookware called a pressure cooker. Some of you don't even know what I'm talking about, do you? Pressure cookers were these wonderful devices that back in the day, you could use to take something that you would normally cook on the stovetop with a regular piece of cookware, and you could cook it in less than half the time. Can I get an amen? So, the way that the thing worked was, it had a lid that you locked on there, and it had a stem that came out, which was a little pressure valve. And you put a weight on there to maintain a certain amount of pressure inside that pot. And that's what gave the capacity to cook things, light and quick with that device. Well, we were kind of young and not too many years married, and we were going to cook some soybeans. Now, soybeans are interesting because they have a little thin skin on the top. And when you begin to cook them, it softens and it will sort of slough off the little thin skins. So we put the soybeans in there and we got it going really good, put the lid on, tightened it, put the pressure valve on the top, and that was that. We're going to have soybeans here before too long. Those little thin skins started sloughing off, and we got inside that stem and kind of jammed it over. And the pressure began to build and build and build. And by golly, it blew that little thing completely out of there, and we had soybeans everywhere. I felt like Bubba on Forrest Gump. I had soybeans on the ceiling, had soybeans on the wall, had soybeans on the countertop, had soybeans on the floor. And that's about all I got to say about that. We had soybeans everywhere. But I want you to understand, we live in a pressure cooker environment, don't we? We do. And there are a lot of stressed out folks, and I see many of you, in town and around and moving around at lightning speed, and a lot of stressed out folks who have too much to do with too little time to get her done. Just don't have enough time. And some of us, the stress and the pressure builds on a financial end because, sometimes we just aren't the best money managers, aren't we? And then the reality is that there's too much money left at the end of the paycheck, right? So there's pressure. And then there's just the stress, isn't there, of just kind of living. And I don't know how some of you guys do it, but you've got to take your kids to practices and to rehearsals, and there's grocery shopping to do, and there's laundry to fold, and there's floors to vacuum, and homework to do, and baths to do, and it's just not enough time. It's just tough. But I want us to understand that all pressure is not bad. Certainly, pressed clothes look better than wrinkled clothes, don't they? Of course they do. And having water pressure in your house ensures there's going to be water flowing all through the house. That's a good thing. I like pressure there, don't you? Of course you do. And, having the right blood pressure ensures that our circulatory systems are functioning healthy. And you know what? That's a lifesaver right there. And if we keep proper pressure in our tires, that means we're going to maximize the miles that we get out of them. And tires are expensive, aren't they? Years ago, I finally got talked into going to a massage therapist. And I always thought that was the flakiest thing ever. But I had my own business at the time, and there were a lot of pressures with that, and it was very physical kind of work, and I was just hurting in a lot of different places. And so I went and bit the bullet, decided to go see this massage therapist. So she, we're sitting there, she was asking me questions I should have been asking myself for a long time. She says, when you feel a lot of pressure in your work, when you're stressed out, where does that show up in your body? I was like, well, yeah, now that you mention it, it's the back of my neck, man. I find myself doing this all the time. Anybody ever do that? Pressure. And we've been doing this physical stuff, and we've been moving a wall all the time, and there were 12-inch blocks, and we were just tearing this wall down. There was a lot of physical. My back was killing me, So, after listening to these questions and answers for a while, she spent a half hour on my neck. I had drool coming on the side. And then she worked on my back, and literally she had to go, we're done. You're going to have to wake up. We're done now. And she got to talking to me, and how, the way these folks work is that they can feel in your back, or in your shoulders, or in your neck, is where the stress and the pressure centers, and they call them pressure points. And so that's when they apply the therapy in those pressure points. And it's kind of wild because it's like, in a sense, it's like putting pressure on pressure. I don't want to belabor this point, but every product probably that we use goes through a certain amount of stress tests. And the reason manufacturers do that is they want to find the very limits of the products that they intend to sell to us. They want to find out how much heat, and how much cold, and how much weight, and how much friction and contact, and a whole variety of things they can take. And they push those things to the very limits until they break. And that's when they go in there and they can see at what point they broke or fell apart or didn't work anymore. And then they will make some fine-tuning adjustments. Maybe it's materials, and maybe it's a whole new design. And they'll take a good product and they'll make it better. It doesn't matter whether it's a cell phone or a jet turbine or the tools it takes to make them. They all go through stress tests. So, it's reasonable to think that the people of God will not be exempt from stress tests in life. In fact, what I want you to understand today is that I believe that a good percentage of the pressures that we face in life, the stresses that we face in life, are really designed by the Lord to test the current limits in us, emotionally, spiritually, and relationally, with God, with others, and with ourselves. They're designed that way. And the reason they're designed that way is so that God can find the breaking points in us and help us to grow beyond them, to become better. And that might be, along with many other reasons, why there are so many potter and clay images in Scripture. They're just bunches. So let me just mention a couple. Isaiah, for instance, and I don't know whether this was a download from God or whether Isaiah just figured it out, but he makes he has this revelation, and he looks at God and he says, "You are the potter, we are the clay." And then Jeremiah has, I can only describe it as a prophet. Sometimes they see in visions, and he had a vision, and the vision he saw was this vision of a potter at work on a wheel with a piece of clay. And let me pick it up. But the pot he was shaping from the clay was marred in his hands. So the potter formed it into another pot, shaping it as it seemed best to him. And the point is that the potter was using pressure on the clay to shape it into a vessel that seemed best to him. But you see, for us as the vessel, it just seems like our lives are spinning out of control, doesn't it? We have no idea what the potter's intentions are for us as the pressures of life come around us to push us and shape us and to mold us. We can't see the finished product from the end of the potter's heart. We don't know what that is. All we know in the current circumstance is the pressure that we feel and how uncomfortable it feels around us.
even though the potter is shaping us as it seems best to him. Now, I think all this is a build-up to understand why the language of Psalm 118:5 is the way that it is, that Gary read does. In the NIV, the translators, and I really wish they hadn't done this, they phrase it this way: in my anguish. That's one meaning of that word, but there are several others. For instance, hard-pressed or narrow place, which would have been a better usage. It literally refers to a place where one is spiritually, emotionally, relationally being constricted or pinched. Before you scratch your head, how many times have you heard somebody say, or you yourself have said, when you have been in a stressful, pressurized situation, when you felt squeezed, I feel like I am under so much pressure right now. Now, we don't know who wrote Psalm 118. Some people have speculated that it was David during the time when he was trying to flee King Saul, who was pursuing him throughout all of Israel on the fringe territories of Philistine. He was hiding out in caves. Others have assumed it was King Hezekiah when there was a lot of pressure against Israel at that point in time from a variety of enemies around them. We don't know who the author was. What we do know is that the author was in a pressure point, a narrow place, a place of stress and distress and pressure, trauma against them. Can you identify with that pressure? I think probably all of us could, from past experiences to maybe a present one we're going through today. Pressure. One of my favorite gospel movies, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? George Clooney in this movie has two idiot friends and they've escaped from prison. And if you've seen the story, you know they just move from scenario to scenario. And throughout the movie, there's these places where pressure mounts and stress comes, and they're kind of put in those narrow places, if you will. And George Clooney has a comment every single time in one of those. Darn, in a tight space. Darn, I'm in a tight place. Well, he doesn't use darn, but it's pretty close to it. There are a variety of tight spots in life and tight places in life, aren't there? Pressure points, trauma, stress, pressure. And here's the thing, is that all of us handle those stress tests differently. None of us handle them the same way. There's a story in the Old Testament where Abraham, he was called by God and given all this land and stuff, and so he goes to a couple of places. And he goes to Egypt and Gerar. Both countries that he goes to, both territories that he goes to, are territories that are not territories that believe in God. They're pagan territories. And they also have a reputation of being tough, mean people. Now, the scriptures tell us about Abraham's wife, Sarah. She wasn't just attractive or cute. They describe her as very beautiful. That's biblical for drop-dead gorgeous. Okay? So when he gets there, Abraham's stressed. He feels pressure. And he's pressured because he thinks these people in Egypt and Gerar, he didn't do this once, he did this twice. That's how he handled it. Could possibly kill him so they could have Sarah. So his solution was, he decided he would fix it. He was going to pass Sarah off as his sister. Guys, let me just make a suggestion. If ever you go to a foreign place somewhere and you're feeling pressure, don't pass your wife off as your sister. It didn't work well for Abraham. It did not. If you think about it, another prophet that I'm reminded of is Elijah. And Elijah, he was a man on God's mission. And he had made King Ahab, he made his life awful. And he was constantly bringing to Ahab a word from the Lord that was guaranteed to pierce the heart of Ahab. And it was happened so many times But Ahab just referred to him as a troubler of Israel. And of course, we know how this thing mounts up to a crescendo, and there's this duel at Mount Carmel. And what happens in that ultimately is that Elijah kills every one of the prophets of Baal. And then he got an email from the queen. You didn't know they had emails then, did you? They did. And so Jezebel says to him, she says, I'm going to make your life tomorrow like one of these dead prophets. Which is another way of saying by tomorrow you're going to be dead. That's a lot of pressure. That's some stress. That's a narrow place. How did Elijah handle that? Handle it on his own mechanisms and his own desires. He ran. He didn't run a little ways. He didn't run for a day. He ran for 40 days, and he didn't stop until he was curled in a fetal position in a cave. You see, trying to resolve a stress test that we're going through in your own strength and your own ingenuity or by avoidance usually ends badly. That's why the author of Psalm 118, verse 5, chose a better solution. I cried to the Lord. In the midst of a stress test or a tight spot, can you think of a better solution? I can't. See, crying out to the Lord is just one of many forms of praying to the Lord. In fact, crying out to the Lord takes on many forms itself. And I don't know about you, but many times I felt pressured in life. And I tried to do it on my own ingenuity, and I am learning now to cry out to the Lord. And my form of crying out is to sit down, take some time, and soak before the Lord and ask the Lord a pretty simple question. Lord, what are you trying to teach me in this? What is the lesson here for me to be learned? What is it that I need to pay attention to? The psalmist said he answered him this way. He set me in a large place. The answer for the psalmist was a relocation. A relocation from a narrow and confined place to a broad, roomy expanse. We would say he got some breathing room. See, the biggest challenge of every single stress test that we face is that we want to eliminate the pressure ASAP, as soon as possible. But the Lord does not want to eliminate the pressure. The Lord wants to use the pressure. And He wants to use the pressure to achieve two purposes. The first is to reveal our limits. The flaws and the breaking points in our character and in our faith, and where it is exactly that we trust the Lord. And secondly, to use the pressure as a gifted artist to reshape us as it seems best to Him, not us to Him. He wants to use the pressure to reform us so He can transform us. If we are willing, and this is the hard part, to yield to the pressure as clay yields to the pressure of the hands of the potter, and if we are patient, and if we cry out / pray to the Lord, in due season, we'll find a space of relief from that pressure. But we will not be the same. We will never be the same. I hate to break the news to you, but our God is a God of stress tests. Our God is a potter of pressure points. There are lots of examples in Scripture to prove it. Let me just trace a few. God put the last plague on Egypt. And when that happened, all you could hear everywhere in that entire country was crying and sorrow and tears because because everybody lost something by way of death. And the people of Israel come out of that situation, and they march until they get to the Red Sea. And there it is. There's the sea in front of them. And during the time that they had marched, behind them, the cavalry was coming. And you could hear the wheels of the chariots. You could hear the hooves thundering down behind them. And there they are, right there at the sea. Pressure. Stress. Gideon was a judge in Israel. And there were nations that had aligned together to form this huge, massive group of warriors and troops to lay siege to Israel at that point in time. More people than you could count, the scriptures tell us. Gideon was able to raise up about 32,000 troops. He gets 32,000 to go against his horde, and he hears the Lord speaking to him, saying to Gideon, "You got too many soldiers." Yeah, his jaw dropped a whole lot more than ours just did, I can tell you that. And then circumstances happen so that those 32 become less and less and less until poor Gideon, to face this horde of people, has 300 soldiers. And then he hears God say, "I think you got about enough now." Stress. Pressure. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were the only three heads still standing over this vast crowd of people who were all bowing down to a statue of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was so infuriated, he said, if you don't bow down to the statue, we're going to throw you in the furnace. And they probably stumbled through the words, but basically they told Nebuchadnezzar, no matter what you do to us, we're not going to bow down to the statue. And we believe God can deliver us. I wonder what they were thinking as they were being dragged to that furnace. And not feet, but yards away, could feel the heat just moving in on them as they're being pushed towards that furnace. Pressure, heat, in that place. And every one of those situations, people go through that pressure, and then finally, God shows up. Chances are high that the very stressful situation you found yourself in today, the narrow place that you are currently in, God wants to use and transform you. The problem is He wants to do it as it seems best to Him, not you. Sometimes it doesn't seem good to us. But like so many times that I've faced and you've faced, the words from an old hymn nail it. Have thine own way, Lord. Thou art the potter. I am the clay. Mold me and make me after your will. While I am waiting, yielded